Hello and welcome to Heartbeat. This week, William sits down with Josiah Presley.
I'm one of 12 kids, 10 of us being adopted. At the age of 13, my parents, they thought I was old enough to know more about my adoption story when they told me that. There's a lot of anger and there's a lot of hurt about how my birth mother, 2 months into her pregnancy with me in South Korea, decided to have a DNC abortion.
Peter gives us a roundup of news from home and abroad, and I give my views on why the village we need in life has to be built, not expected.
Josiah, thank you for joining us here on SPUCTV. Now, Josiah,
Thanks for having me on.
Yours is a story that really does need to be shared. I'm going to ask you to go way back in time here, but please would you tell our audience about your start in life?
Yeah, so I live in the United States, in the state of Oklahoma, actually, but I'm originally from South Korea. I was adopted when I was 13 months old, and I was brought over to the States. I was raised in a very Christian home. My dad, he's the pastor of worship of the church I grew up in, and my mom, she's a children's minister, and so I grew up in a very Christian home. I grew up in a very pro-life home. My parents, they lived out those convictions by adopting kids. So I'm one of 12 kids, 10 of us being adopted. And so I grew up in that home. And at the age of 13, my parents, they thought I was old enough to know more about my adoption story. And so they actually told me about how my birth mother, 2 months into her pregnancy with me in South Korea, decided to have a DNC abortion. It's a type of abortion where the doctor rips the baby apart and brings them out in pieces. At the time, they thought it had all gone how it was supposed to, and so they sent her home. But then a few months later, she realized the abortion actually failed. I was still very much so alive, very much so, still growing and developing inside of her. And so she kept me, and I was born later on that year. I lived with a foster family for a year before I was adopted and brought over to the Presley family here in the States.
Wow, that's quite something. Now, Josiah, this is perhaps a bit more of a personal question, so I'll answer it as you please, but what feelings would you say you now have towards your biological mother?
So there's definitely been a journey with it. At the time, at 13, when they told me that, there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of hurt. A lot of anger due to the fact that I grew up in a home that believed abortion was wrong. We understood abortion to be the taking of innocent human life, a valuable human life. And so I had that understanding. And so there's a lot of anger that she would make that kind of decision, such a wrong decision. There's a lot of hurt because after all, she was my birth mother, my biological, my flesh and blood. And so there's a lot of hurt. How could they make that kind of a decision against me? I have a deformed arm. And so growing up, I had a lot of self-image issues, self-worth issues tied up with that. At the time, I blamed the fact of my deformity on her and her choices. And so there's a lot of anger and hurt there. That kind of continued on for a number of years. For me, the change occurred when I was 16. That's the time I became saved. I surrendered my life to Jesus as I found my value and my worth in Him. And my security in Him and what He has to say about me and the value He assigns to my life, I began to change the way I viewed myself. And then eventually it changed the way I viewed my birth mother and my birth father. I found true forgiveness for them in that as I recognized that God had forgiven me so much when I had failed Him, when I had gone against Him. He forgave me so much that I'm then called to forgive others. And it's a lot easier to forgive others in light of the forgiveness that we receive in Jesus. And so as I became older, as I found identity, security, value, and forgiveness in Christ, that really changed a lot of my perspective towards my birth parents. Alongside of that, as I became involved in pro-life work and sharing my story and speaking and activism and things like that, as I talked with different people and as I met more and more post-abortive women who had made those decisions, the Lord really softened my heart towards them as I recognize how oftentimes they're in extremely maybe broken situations or desperate situations or situations where they feel like they have no other option, or situations where maybe they were even um, tricked in the moment, or things like that. And the guilt that they have felt and that they have carried for so many years afterwards because of making those decisions. As I encountered those kinds of women, um, the Lord really softened my heart towards my birth mother, and the decisions I made to see her as another human being, who's valuable and also deserving love and kindness. And so as I've shifted, definitely as I've grown, as God's worked in my life, there's been forgiveness that's come. Um, there's been a desire for what's good for her to come. If you'd asked me a number of years ago, that would not have been the case. But now there is a care for, I don't know where she's at in life, or what she's doing today or things like that, but definitely a care for that.
That's beautiful. And on the back of something you said there, Josiah, tell me, how have post-abortive women reacted when they've met you, known of your story, you've told them of your story?
Yeah, I mean, so usually there's it's a kind of a spectrum of responses. I think a lot of it depends, typically on where they're at in their journey. So obviously, if I'm encountering one who is maybe fresh or fairly fresh off of that decision, and they're kind of still going through some of those pieces of, um, is the decision I need to make, is the right decision I need to make, like, those kinds. If they're kind of still in that mindset, oftentimes there's a little more uh, adversity, I guess, in the interaction, as far as, I'm kind of almost seen a little more as an enemy, then, in that sense, as a combatant in that sense. But for the most part, especially the majority of the speaking I do a lot of speaking mainly for pregnancy centers, and their annual fundraising and things like that. And a lot of that work, a lot of the post-abortive women I encounter and interact with there, are women who made the decision a number of years ago, and they've carried the guilt and the weight of that. Some of them have hopefully gone through different um, courses and things like that, to help them process that and grieve that well. And so, if they're on that side of it, usually there's more of a sweet interaction, as far as just almost feeling a redemptive interaction, if you will. If they're kind of still in process of that, I then do a lot of, maybe for lack of better words, triaging of, like, hey, maybe they're just sharing it for the first time with me, or they're just things like that. And so it's like, hey, how can we connect you then with resources to actually help you, and to help you recognize and affirm your value, and recognize that your life's not over, that God loves you, God still has a plan for your life. And let's help connect you with people who are going to help you. I really believe that, because there's kind of a spectrum of responses, I would say, usually.
Yes, that's it. And the thing is, Josiah, abortion survivors like yourself can argue the pro-life position from a very unique standpoint, naturally. What is your primary message, therefore, to our pro-abortion detractors?
Yeah, I mean, so my primary message is just to recognize the two recognitions, right? That life starts at conception, and that all human life should be valued and protected. And I think when we talk about it a lot of times with the other side, there's usually not a question whether or not human life should be valued. Sometimes the question is, where does that human life start, or where that human life values? Now, we will say that, and here's the difficult thing: we will say that on a principle basis, but usually when it actually comes into practice, we don't do that. And we live in a world that doesn't do that. We live in a world that all the time would say human life is valuable, but we can so quickly point to saying, hey, these human lives are less valuable than those human lives. Like, I mean, that's all over our society, across the board, whether we're talking about the born or the unborn, right? All the time. And the country where I live in right now, the United States, like, immigration is a big deal. Like, we so often, like, can split sides, and we can decide, like, hey, these people's lives are less valuable or more valuable depending on where they were born. right? We'll talk about it with disabilities. We'll talk about it with economics. That like all the time we make those decisions of saying, hey, these lives are more valuable, these lives are less valuable, even though on a principle basis we would say all human life is valuable and should be protected and cared for. And I think the thing that I really try to, a lot of my advocacy and speaking is this true recognition that all human life is valuable and all human life should be valued, should truly be valued across the board. And when we talk about that, as far as my unique story in that situation, obviously I have a situation in which an attempt was made on my life before my life actually brought anything to bear on this world, right? Before I'd been born, before decisions had been made, before any of those types of things had happened. And so when we're talking about in the womb, we are talking about the most vulnerable. We're talking about the most defenseless, the most helpless, but also the most innocent. And I think a lot of times we judge a society by how we treat people, but I think you really judge a society by how well they treat the most vulnerable, the most defenseless, the most easily expelled among you. Right now, how we treat the elite, that doesn't tell us not how we treat the strong. I mean, those matter, but how we treat those doesn't tell us the goodness or the righteousness of the society we live in, but how we treat the people who it doesn't matter on our lives on a daily basis how we treat them, right? The people who it doesn't benefit us to help.
Yes, and
right?
the sad fact is that the vast majority of nations are failing on that level.
Yeah.
There's legal abortion is widespread, as we know. Of course, you had the overturning of Roe v. Wade almost 3 years ago now. But sadly, I think if we look at the statistics, it's been good in some states and bad in others. It wasn't the death knell that we hoped it was.
Yeah, well, and it's all on the rise too with the abortion bill. I mean, the state I live in, abortion is illegal to practice it, but we've got abortion bills pouring into our state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, Josiah, do you think that the pro-life movement should expend more of its energy on the political battle or the cultural battle? Now, as a disclaimer, we're here representing SPUCTV, which is part of the wider organisation, the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children. So we're engaged in both the political and the cultural. But SPUCTV specifically, we very much see our remit as trying to change the culture. Which do you think is the more significant?
So I mean, I think a lot of it kind of depends on the setting you're in, right? So like obviously in America, we're very democratic in how we do things, and so ultimately, if we want to see the politics change, we have to change the heart of people, right? And so there's a certain level of because of that, because we vote all of our elected officials, all those types of people into place, they will ultimately reflect our culture, I believe, in the United States. Now, in other countries where that may not be as much the case, there definitely is, I think, a difference, maybe a little bit in focus there. I think the way I see it, I look at it on a individual basis. I look at it from person to person, and what I say is, everybody has their sphere of influence. You have the people who you can impact in your life. I have the people who I can impact in my life. And all of us have different spheres of influences. And so when we talk about being pro-life, I think I encourage people to do everything you can inside of your sphere of influence and then push past it. But first, everything you can inside your influence. So if we're talking about, if your sphere of influence is more culturally speaking in culture, as far as, as a teacher or things like that, in those types of roles, definitely like focus there to use all of your energy you can there. But if you're somewhere else where you're a public official or you're in a different role of that nature, like use all of your influence there and look at what can I do? Because I think a lot of times what we want to do is we want to go, which is the best place to be in, the sphere to be in. And so and we might go, and sometimes I think we can deflect, right? We might say, hey, the best place to put all of our focus is on the political side. Well, I'm not in politics, so all I'm going to do is I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote for conservative the right politicians, and that's all I have to do, and that's all my part. And we like step back and go, I've done my part, because that's the route to take. And it's important for us to do that, but it doesn't stop there. We have to look at, where's my sphere of influence, my impact, what can I do, and how can I use all of it to protect life.
That's brilliant. And the major takeaway there for me is that we can all do something. Often people will come to us and say, I'm devastated by the abortion statistics. We had them released just yesterday, and they, it was another year where abortions increased exponentially in this country. They come to us and they say, I want to help. What can I do? Well, here's an example. Last Saturday, with a group of other pro-lifers, we went leafleting. All of us, at the very least, can do door-to-door leafleting. So God's given us all talents. It's just finding your niche, essentially.
And I think that's a big piece, right? Whereas your sphere, but then also push past that, right? Because there's always other opportunities of things that are needed, right? That anybody can do, right?
Yes, yeah. Now, Josiah, we know that abortion is ugly. As pro-lifers, we know abortion is ugly. Do you think, therefore, that graphic abortion imagery, which shows the tiny victims of abortion, the unborn babies, do you think it's helpful in trying to convince others of pro-life truths?
I think it depends on the setting, right? I think you definitely have to be aware of your setting, who your audience is. I think you also have to be aware of how you are trying, what you're trying to accomplish with it, right? And so like, I'll be honest, we talk about like graphic imagery. I think with a pro-choice world, like if your main people you're interacting with are more pro-choice people, I don't know how much that's going to help, except for escalate the situation and shut down dialogue. If we're talking about people who are on the fence, that's like hard truth that they might need to see and know to be able to recognize, oh, hey, I do have to make a decision on this, because it's not a neutral matter. If we're talking about with Christians or conservatives who would claim to be pro-life, but who are very, I would say, lax in those pro-life work, to mobilize them, that might be something very important to help mobilize them. But I think a lot of that kind of depends on your setting. You think about, the United States, when we were talking about the abolition of slavery, fighting that, using graphic imagery. When we talk about World War II, when we're talking about the Holocaust, things like that, like we have those times where we have deemed it appropriate to use graphic imagery to make sure we don't go back to those things, to tell the truth of what it is. I think part of the reason that we see so much backlash against it right now is because it is graphic, but also because we currently live in a world that says, and that's okay, right?
Now, Josiah, you mentioned in your answer there the inactivity of some Christian churches. Mm-hmm. You're a pastor of a Baptist church. Do you think there's more that Christians in the West could be doing to bring an end to the nightmare that is legal abortion?
I think, I believe so. To me, I believe that abortion is the greatest evil of our day. If you want to talk about the darkest point of a culture, I think that's it.
Biggest death toll by far.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think when we talk about resources now in the West, I also recognize, in the United States, there are tons of resources mainly provided by churches and by Christian organizations, and so like definitely like it is being addressed, definitely not being ignored. But I do think, I think more could be done. I think the majority of what we're talking about, what needs to be done, at least in my country, as far as when we talk about the abortion conversation, I say if we want to see it changed in America, we need to see life changed. We need to see souls changed, and we see that through the gospel of Jesus. And so I think definitely there needs to be an awakening among our churches, just as far as gospel proclamation, to see others come to know Jesus and to see that transformation take place in their lives, to then help them see the truth of what abortion is.
Yeah, so arguably, I mean, it's a big challenge, but arguably we need to restore some semblance of Christianity to society before we're going to see real change when it comes to abortion. Is that what you're saying? Essentially
so.
restoring Christendom.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there were issues with that, right? Because they don't practice it perfectly. But I think when we talk about it, I think about it in the sense of not necessarily on a political scale as much as on a individual scale, right? Of seeing Christians reach other people with the gospel. And as that transforms their lives, transforming those views and that transforming the culture we're in.
Josiah Presley, thank you very much for sharing your testimony. I think it would do our viewers an awful lot of good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
SPUC has launched a new online tool ahead of the Scottish Parliament election on the 7th of May. It's designed to help voters engage with candidates on life-related issues. The resource allows users to search by postcode to identify candidates in their area, contact them directly with key questions, and view their past voting records where they are available. It also outlines political party positions on issues such as abortion and assisted suicide. William Curry brings us an update.
This is a time of real change, politically speaking, in Scotland, with many MSPs stepping down ahead of the election at Holyrood in a few weeks' time. As for our two issues, abortion and assisted suicide, so it's worth remembering that abortion is a devolved issue in Scotland, has been since 2018. Most recently, in November of just last year, there was the publishing of the Abortion Law Review, which essentially suggested decriminalisation, much like the England and Wales model, which was recently voted in by the Lords down there. As for assisted suicide, we did see the success of the defeat of Liam McArthur's assisted dying bill recently. So with these two things in mind, we've released this election tool. It's really good. I can vouch for it. I've used it already. As a constituent of Edinburgh, North Eastern and Leith, I've already contacted all of my candidates and had a response from one so far. So I'd encourage you to use it. Essentially, you put in your postcode, all your candidates come up, and if we've got the data for it, their voting intentions on abortion and assisted suicide will come up. If we don't, this is where you can come in and you can get that intel for us by contacting them, hopefully getting a response. Any responses you do get, please forward on to us. And then in that sense, we build up more and more intel. So I'd encourage you to use it and ultimately to make an informed decision.
And you can find the tool by visiting spuc.org.uk and clicking the campaign tab. Concerns have been raised after an activist group placed abortion pills inside hidden key safes across Malta and Gozo in a move intended to bypass the country's abortion laws. The organisation Women on Waves said it installed around 15 safes containing abortion medication which can be accessed by women in early pregnancy after contacting the group for codes and locations. The initiative has sparked controversy in Malta, where abortion remains illegal except where a woman's life is in danger. Critics have warned that distributing abortion drugs in this way raises serious concerns about safety, regulation and accountability, particularly where medical supervision is absent. There are also fears that such methods could make it impossible to identify cases of coercion or ensure proper care for women experiencing complications. From an ethical perspective, opponents argue that placing abortion pills in public locations risks exposing vulnerable women to harm. Supporters of the initiative say it highlights what they see as restrictive laws, but critics insist that any response should focus instead on providing care, support and alternatives for women experiencing crisis pregnancies. The development is likely to intensify debate in Malta over abortion law, medical safety and how best to protect both women and their unborn children. Reporting by the Daily Wire in the United States has revealed that President Joe Biden's administration took a highly confrontational stance towards anyone opposed to abortion. During his presidency, Biden consistently supported expanding access to abortion, including calls to restore nationwide provision following the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022. However, controversy has centred on the use of federal law, particularly the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances FACE Act, originally designed to protect access to both abortion clinics and crisis pregnancy centres, which was used mainly to prosecute activists involved in protests outside abortion facilities. Some reports claim enforcement was disproportionately directed at those opposing abortion, raising questions about fairness and balance in the justice system. The Biden administration's actions clearly marginalised individuals who advocate for unborn children and support alternatives to abortion. The broader cultural and political effects were that respectful dialogue on the issue became increasingly polarised. Criticism continues that the Biden administration imprisoned Christians for peaceful prayer, ignored hundreds of violent attacks on churches and pregnancy centres, and instructed the FBI to plant informants to monitor, quote, radical traditionalist Catholics, unquote, inside their own parishes. The United States has expressed concern over the prosecution of a Northern Ireland pastor charged under abortion buffer zone legislation, in a case raising wider questions about freedom of speech and religious expression. Grandfather of 7, Clive Johnson, 77, is on trial at Coleraine Magistrates Court after preaching a sermon near Causeway Hospital in July 2024. He faces 2 charges under the Abortion Services Safe Access Zones Act, which restricts certain activities within designated areas around clinics. US State Department officials said they were monitoring the case, describing it as part of a broader pattern of concern over free expression in Europe. Critics argue the prosecution risks criminalising peaceful religious activity, particularly as court papers reportedly do not allege harassment or obstruction. Those concerned about abortion have highlighted the case as evidence that buffer zone laws may be applied too broadly, potentially limiting legitimate expression, including preaching or prayer. They warn that such measures could discourage individuals from offering support or sharing beliefs in public spaces. The case follows other high-profile prosecutions under similar laws, drawing international attention and prompting debate over fundamental freedoms. The trial is set to continue next week. Serious concerns have been raised after reports that women in Scotland have developed brain tumours following use of a widely prescribed contraceptive injection, prompting legal action against its manufacturer. According to reports in the Daily Record newspaper, a number of women have been left with life-altering injuries, including the development of meningiomas, tumours that grow on the brain and can cause symptoms such as vision problems, seizures, and memory loss. Legal firms are now supporting affected women seeking compensation amid claims that patients were not adequately warned about the potential risks associated with long-term use of the injection. Studies have suggested a possible link between the contraceptive, which contains synthetic hormones, and an increased risk of developing these tumours, with some research indicating a significantly higher likelihood among long-term users. The case renews concerns about the safety of hormonal birth control and whether women are always given full information about possible side effects. Campaigners argue that decisions affecting women's health should be based on clear, transparent evidence and informed consent. The cases are expected to intensify scrutiny of contraceptive drugs and raise wider questions about how women's healthcare is regulated and communicated. I'm Peter Kearney, and that was SPUC TV News, bringing to light what others hide.
Modern society has been accustomed to online connection and communities. Despite this, over a third of Britons last year reported feeling lonely. This is exacerbated, of course, when women are trying to raise their babies without a community. The phrase, "it takes a village," takes on a whole new level in 2026, as most don't know their neighbours' names. The concept of community and what it entails has done a complete 180 since social media has replaced a lot of in real life connection. In order to combat this, I would suggest if you want to have a village, be a villager. If we stewarded our free time and our singleness with serving others, whether it be young or old, over time we can reap the rewards. The old saying, "it takes a village to raise a child," is very true, but it doesn't simply appear overnight. Last October, research published by the Office for National Statistics showed that 33% of Britons aged 16 to 29 reported feeling lonely, often, always, or some of the time. The highest of all age groups, 17% of those over 70 said the same thing. The ability to connect in person and serve others has been cut short by algorithms. It can feel like there's very little time and energy to create your tribe when you're in the throes of the postpartum period. The priorities will have changed, and there is immense pressure put on parents to provide what multi-generational communities used to have in previous years. We were not meant to do life all alone. However, modern culture has put a strain on the way people connect. It can also put the pressure on us that we have to have it all together all the time. The challenge is to seek out opportunities to create those pockets of community, while one has the ability and free time to do so before parenthood. Some say it may be an oppressive structure, but what no one wants to talk about is the elephant in the room. What were we doing with ourselves to build a village before we needed one? The idea you can have your cake and eat it when it applies to community postpartum is naive. It has to be built. If we neglect others in their time of need, don't be surprised if others do the same. I'm Catherine Mokler, and this is My Viewpoint. I recognise that I have entered tricky territory. Now, you might think it is easy for me to say, but it hasn't, as I have left family and friends back home in Ireland to build a life in Scotland. Moving homes multiple times, it was challenging, but seeking out community was a lifeline during hard moments. The goodness of others carried me. If you desire to be a mother or father one day, it is something to seriously consider creating for yourself. A community, whether that be built through faith, sports, smiling at your local barista, chatting to those in line while you're out shopping, or attending clubs in your local area. There will be days where homesickness and loneliness arise, yet having the emotional support as others has proven invaluable. The key is that many wait too long to build a community before realising they desperately need one. Having women gather around the table to uplift, unplug and inspire each other really makes a difference each week, as by Wednesday life can throw curveballs. For me, it looks like helping out at my local parish youth group once a month with kids of various ages and get involved in dancing and games. It's not my usual sort of thing, yet I get to know the children and their parents by name, and I pass on what I know to the kids. I've offered my time to babysit kids of my busy friends who are studying or working while being a mum. It gives me experience with children, and I enjoy my time being trusted with them. It opened my eyes again to the reality that motherhood is no small feat. There are also fun, creative ways to form a circle of care. I had women I met at a fashion event over for a paint night. Hosting painting or games nights really work wonders in building connections. Keeping it monthly or rotating it shares the load. For the deeper chats, I host a Bible study in my home. We rotate it between friends, all busy women who are either stay-at-home moms, solicitors, teachers, midwives. What we sow, we reap, and the goodness of others has helped me through stressful times in my life, especially when I was moving house. To speed up the process, a friend kindly offered to help me transport my luggage. Others were there on standby in case I needed more assistance. Offers of help like this go a long way and create a positive ripple effect, since they knew I was exhausted from making decisions. I know Sir Alex Ferguson talks about making decisions as being the key to a successful life, but no one prepares you for the amount of decisions when it comes to moving house. Hospitality is a gateway to connection. It does come through at the expense of time and money, yet the results are worth it. So many people, young and old, crave community and the opportunity to be seen and loved. To be a villager, one doesn't need to be Mary Berry in the kitchen to help others feel loved, included and seen. The phrase, "let me know if you need anything," can be benevolent, but are we actually doing it in our free time or singleness to cultivate a core group of friends? There are various ways to create that help physically, whether it's meal trains, offering to take your friend's child to the park, helping with laundry or dropping dinner on someone's doorstep, or paying for lunch for our friends. Yet we need to actually do it, to connect in a non-tech way. In a world that pushes know thyself as a mantra, we can end up forgetting our neighbours. We need the support of our friends in all aspects of life. Back in the day, when times were hard, we sought out advice from those older than us in the community. Now the burden falls in most cases to us alone. But I will say, as women with access to so much online, to use it as a starting point, but ensure to take it to real life. Consider who you can serve in real life. Look for ways to serve in your parish, clubs and communities, from libraries to coffee shops. Offering a helping hand to a mum in need now will hopefully form bonds for you if you ever found yourself in that position later in life. When a woman becomes a mom for the first time, it is important to note that she is doing a village's worth of work already alone. Yet having someone to call to help with tidying her home, to listen or get a coffee pays dividends. A new mom more than likely misses her friends and is entrenched with responsibilities. The strength of a girl group can be unwavering during life's ups and downs, as the proverb goes, "As iron sharpens iron, so does one person sharpen another." If we desire to have kind people around us during the demanding seasons of parenthood, we have to really take accountability and ask ourselves, what am I doing to help and serve others where I currently am? Over time, connections and thoughtful community are formed through time and effort in the day-to-day moments of life, whether it be through hospitality or other ways of giving back. The broad principle still holds true. If you want to have a village, be a villager.
That's all we have time for this week. If you're enjoying our content, please like, comment and subscribe. And if you have any suggestions or topics you think we should cover, please email us at the address on the screen or the description below. Thank you for watching.